The fossilized skull, discovered at Florisbad, South Africa, has been the subject of immense scientific interest for nearly a century. At first glance, it offers a tantalizing glimpse into the deep past of Homo sapiens. But how old is it really? Since its discovery in 1932, the Florisbad skull has sparked debate among anthropologists, paleontologists, and evolutionary biologists. It has been hailed as everything from an archaic African Neanderthal to an early anatomically modern human, a transitional form, or even a regional variant of Homo sapiens. Today, however, there is renewed skepticism about the widely cited age of 259,000 years. As paleoanthropologist John Hawkes and others have pointed out, serious doubts remain about the validity of this date and its implications for human evolution. Let us consider why this question still matters. If the Florisbad skull is truly 259,000 years old, it would be the earliest fossil evidence of Homo sapiens in southern Africa. It would suggest that our species coexisted with other hominins such as Homo naledi within the same geographical and ecological niche, a scenario that raises profound questions about competition, extinction, and evolutionary succession. But if it is younger, perhaps far younger, then much of this narrative collapses. It would place Florisbad in line with other transitional or early modern human fossils, such as Laetoli hominid 18 from Tanzania, and perhaps closer in age to the 120,000-year-old Middle Stone Age levels of the site itself. Indeed, some scholars have suggested that the Florisbad specimen is not a 259,000-year-old ancestor, but a relatively recent human with archaic traits, one that shares similarities not only with LH18, but with Neanderthals and Aboriginal Australians as well. The prevailing age of the Florisbad skull, 259,000 plus or minus 35,000 years, comes from a 1996 study by Rainer Grun and colleagues. They used electron spin resonance dating on a molar found at the site and concluded that the skull belonged to an early Homo sapiens, a key figure in the story of our origins. This estimate, landing right at the boundary between the Middle and Late Pleistocene, seemed to confirm the idea that modern humans were already taking shape in South Africa, while archaic species like Homo naledi still lingered nearby. This was convenient. The idea of a smooth transition from archaic to modern humans in Africa, neatly timed to 300,000 years ago, fit nicely with the narrative then gaining ground in paleoanthropology. But as John Hawkes writes, a transitional pre-modern human form in southern Africa 259,000 years ago was exactly what researchers expected to find in 1996. In other words, the date supported a story that people already wanted to believe. But is that how science should work? In a critical re-evaluation of the Florisbad site, John Hawkes and his team questioned nearly every component of the 1996 study. What we found, Hawkes wrote, is that there are several reasons to doubt that the fossil is really 259,000 years old. These doubts stem from the complex and poorly recorded stratigraphy of the site, where layers of peat and sediment were mixed over time by methane eruptions from the spring vent. This mixing makes it extremely difficult to determine whether the tooth and the skull fragment actually belong to the same individual or even the same time period. The original excavations reported that the hominin skull fragments came from a peat layer, but the radiation in this peat was never measured by geochronologists, Hawkes points out. That's a serious issue because peat is known to concentrate uranium, a key variable in ESR dating. If this was not accounted for, then the date derived from the tooth may be wildly inaccurate. I don't think we'll ever know the age of the Florisbad hominin material, Hawkes admits. It's tragic that so much of the African hominin fossils that are now attributed to the Middle Pleistocene was unearthed at a time when detailed spatial and stratigraphic context were not often recorded. Without proper context, the dating of Florisbad becomes less a matter of science than of guesswork. If we abandon the 259,000-year date, what alternatives remain? One possibility is that the Florisbad skull is closer in age to Laetoli hominid 18, a fossil from Tanzania generally dated to around 120,000 to 140,000 years ago. LH18 shares notable morphological similarities with Florisbad, including its combination of archaic cranial features and a relatively modern facial structure. Indeed, some have compared Florisbad directly to LH18, classified as early anatomically modern human. More recently, Chris Stringer argued that Florisbad, like Jebel Ehud and Eli Springs, should be considered part of a diverse array of archaic or early Homo sapiens across Africa. These specimens exhibit a fascinating mix of traits: thick cranial bones, prominent brow ridges, long and low vaults, yet faces that are surprisingly gracile and human-like. So perhaps Florisbad doesn't belong to the ancient founding population of modern humans at all. Instead, it could represent a relatively recent human group, retaining archaic features, or the result of hybridization with older hominin lineages. If so, its place in the timeline of human evolution would shift dramatically, from a foundational early Homo sapiens to something more akin a late Homo sapiens. Now, let us return to the implications of the Florisbad age for the coexistence of Homo sapiens and Homo naledi. The principle of competitive exclusion states that two species cannot long occupy the same ecological niche. If both are hunting, gathering, and occupying similar environments, one must eventually outcompete the other. The Florisbad site is only about 400 kilometers, 250 miles, from the Rising Star cave system, where Homo naledi remains were discovered. If both species really lived at the same time in the same part of southern Africa, the questions are no longer just about archaeology. They are about encounter, displacement, and potentially extermination. Hawkes poses the question bluntly: did these two very different hominin populations coexist? In an interview with the BBC, Hawkes said, "It's hard to say it was geographic isolation because there's no boundary, no barrier. It's the same landscape from here to Tanzania. We're in one continuous savanna, woodland-type habitat." He added that the human-sized teeth probably reflected a diet like that of modern humans. In addition, Homo naledi had limb proportions just like ours, and there is no apparent reason why it could not have used stone tools. It doesn't look like they're in a different ecological niche. That's weird. It's a problem. This is not a situation where we can point to them and say they coexisted because they're using resources differently, Hawkes told BBC News. It's a valid question, but one built on unstable ground. If Florisbad is indeed much younger, then the issue of coexistence evaporates. Rather than having Homo sapiens and Homo naledi shoulder to shoulder on the South African savanna, we would be looking at two chronologically distinct populations that occupied the region at very different times. One disappears, the other emerges. From the beginning, the Florisbad skull has provoked far-reaching comparisons. In 1935, Dreyer reconstructed the skull and classified it as a new species, Homo helmai. Others compared it to the European Neanderthals, and another classified it as an African Neanderthal variant. The Florisbad skull measurements cry out for a Neanderthal interpretation, they wrote in 1937. Scottish anatomist Alexander Galloway went further, noting that 2/3 of the Florisbad features were found in modern Aboriginal Australian skulls, and 2/3 also in the Boskop skull. He speculated that Florisbad might even be a Proto-Australian, or an ancestor of the Whadjuk man of Java. This raised the intriguing possibility of a deep and poorly understood connection between African and Australo-Melanesian populations, one that bypassed the familiar out-of-Africa model. The Florisbad brain volume, estimated at 1,440 cubic centimetres, also adds to the mystery. It is well within the modern range and larger than the average for today's humans. In this respect, it differs from the smaller-brained Homo naledi and bears more similarity to modern humans, and even to robust archaics like Neanderthals and Denisovans. All of this highlights what researchers often call the muddle in the Middle Pleistocene, a period stretching from about 780,000 to 125,000 years ago. It is a time of enormous evolutionary activity and experimentation, yet the fossil record is sparse and fragmentary. As Hawkes notes, it is a mistake to think there is any silver bullet approach that can provide the ages of such fossils. So we are left with questions. Was Florisbad a true early Homo sapiens, dating to over 250,000 years ago? Or is it younger, perhaps closer to 120,000 years, and therefore more aligned with transitional or regional variants? Is it possible, as some have argued, that its morphology reflects a hybrid population, the result of introgression from older lineages? In many ways, the mystery of the Florisbad skull is a case study in the broader uncertainties of human evolution. Its morphological ambiguity, archaic yet modern, robust yet gracile, mirrors the murkiness of its dating. Found in a spring vent deposit, exposed to uranium-rich peat and lacking rigorous stratigraphic records, the Florisbad skull resists easy categorization. But this very ambiguity may be its greatest value. It forces us to re-examine comfortable narratives and to remain skeptical of linear, deterministic models of human evolution. The current data do not demonstrate the presence of Homo sapiens in southern Africa 260,000 years ago, Hawkes concludes, and that means the story is still open. The Florisbad skull stands at a crossroads of science and speculation, a haunting reminder that our past is far more complex and far more contested than we once imagined. As with so many fossils from the Middle Pleistocene, it may never reveal its secrets entirely. But by continuing to question, to probe, and to revisit old assumptions with new tools and fresh eyes, we get closer to understanding who we are and how we came to be. However, regarding the Pan-African origin of Homo sapiens, Lee Berger, whose team discovered the 300,000-year-old Homo naledi, said he's unconvinced that modern humans lived all over Africa 300,000 years ago. They've taken 2 data points and not drawn a line between them, but a giant map of Africa, he told The Guardian. So what happened when modern humans met Homo naledi? Likely the same fate as the Neanderthals. As Arthur Keith wrote in 1915, the most marvelous aspect of the problem raised by the recognition of Neanderthal man as a distinct type is his apparently sudden disappearance. A more virile form extinguished him. The one thing we are now certain of is that he was not suddenly converted into the modern type of man.